Друзья, приветствую всех на нашем сегодняшнем подкасте, в котором я буду говорить с Райаном. Райан является экспертом по IELTS, родом из Канады. В данном подкасте мы будем обсуждать разные стратегии подготовки к экзамену. Надеюсь, вам будет интересно.
Today I'm speaking with Sultan. Sultan, so Sultan, let's start by creating a bit of a profile of who you are and
Okay.
what your IELTS experience was. So do you want to tell us a bit about your background and motivation for taking the exam?
All right. Hello, Ryan. First of all, thank you for having me in this wonderful podcast. And let me introduce myself. My name is Sultan. And nowadays I'm 28 years old, coming from Kazakhstan and based in Nur Sultan. It is former Astana, the capital of Kazakhstan. Just for those of you who doesn't know, recently our capital has been renamed into Nur Sultan, and after the name of our first president. So my motivation for taking an exam was a bit simple. I was applying for master degree in China, in Beijing, and one of the requirements was, of course, present some kind of certificate or proof of your English commands. And one of them was IELTS. That's the easiest one to take. So I took this exam.
Okay. And when was that?
Actually, it was 5 years ago, to be honest. It was 5 years ago.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So now if we talk specifically about your IELTS experience,
Yes.
so why don't you give us firstly the scores that you received in all four sections and then the overall band?
Okay, very nice. So for the listening, because it goes first, right? Listening, it was 8.5.
Mm-hmm.
Then it was reading was 6.
Mm-hmm.
Writing was 7. Speaking was 6 as well.
Okay.
So an overall score was 7.
Overall of 7. An overall band of 7. Very amazing score in listening and a very strong score in writing and in the other sections as well. And so for your program, I'm guessing they needed a 6.5. Was that right?
Actually, it was a bit lower.
Okay.
Lower, but it doesn't matter. Anyway, I got it.
You got what you needed, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Okay, so then let's talk about your approach. Maybe first we could just create a bit of a profile of the environment that you were studying in.
Okay,
So,
great.
I mean, did you have English-speaking friends, or were you, working with a tutor or anything like that, or were you studying by yourself? What was the situation there?
Okay, very interesting question. Well, first of all, I guess my biggest advantage was that I was studying in a special school, which is called here Lyceum, like special school, gymnasium,
Okay.
Lyceum, and the focus of the school was studying English, and I was doing that for 4 years actually.
Mhm.
And after that, I continued my education and applied for my bachelor degree, majoring in English and German. So I spent another 4 years studying English. But to be honest, I guess like my biggest achievement was at school, studying for 4 years, and this is where I would say boosted my English to a higher level. And university was just, bachelor. Studying bachelor was just like, was a piece of cake for me.
Okay, great. So, would young people in Kazakhstan typically study English at primary school? I mean, is this something that's part of the curriculum, or was this a skill that you had to develop, as part of your tertiary education?
Yeah, they're like, very good question. You are asking questions like an IELTS examiner speaking. Yeah, very good question actually. Well, because I graduated from school a long time ago, but I remember we started studying English at, I guess, grade 2. So when I was about 8 years old. And for most of the students, school children here in Kazakhstan, they start learning it in a very young age. Even, I would say, from grade 1. But, studying English from grade 1 and the level of education, these are two different things.
Mm-hmm.
The level of education is usually low. It depends on the type of school you're going to, depends on the city you're studying in. Of course, a lot of things. For example, if you study in a village, of course, it's about stuff. English teachers usually don't go there. They don't stay in the villages. They try to go to the bigger cities. So the level of education is low. But if you study in a city and like special schools, you may have very good teachers. And actually nowadays we have a chain of schools which are again called after our first president, but it doesn't matter the name. The education level is very high there. The best teachers, a lot of teachers coming from foreign countries, including USA, Australia, and etc. So there, of course, the level of English is very high.
Okay, great. So it sounds like then, I guess young people in Kazakhstan would typically be trilingual. Is that right? So they'd speak Kazakh, Russian, and then they would study some English as part of their general
right.
curriculum.
Yeah, you're very, very right. If you've done your homework, like in Kazakhstan, it's our kind of government policy to develop trilingual society. Of course, Kazakh, first language as a national language, Russian as a language of multinational communication inside the Kazakhstan, because Kazakhstan is a multinational country with more than 100 nationalities living together. And the third one, of course, English, and English is an international language.
Yeah, and it seems to be a growing hub for business. I mean, I see lots of job offers, particularly in the education sector.
Exactly.
Like you were saying, you get lots of visiting professors from the US and from the UK, and there seems to be a lot of residency options on offer.
Exactly.
So it sounds like a pretty exciting place to be, and that the education is something that the country is heavily investing in.
Exactly.
Obviously, I think sometimes people don't realize how big Kazakhstan actually is.
The ninth largest country in the world.
The ninth largest, right? Yeah, I heard that at some time in the past. Yeah, that it's physically very, very large. It's a lot of territory, and it's also strategically located because it's like right in the center of Asia, isn't it?
It's between China and Russia.
Yeah. So that's very strategic. It sounds like an exciting place. I hear of people going there as the growing tourism industry as well.
But the population is very small, to be honest. The territory is very large, like vast territory, but the population is very small, just like 18 million people overall.
Yeah, so I imagine actually your nation in that regard is similar to mine. I'm from Canada. We also, very large territory, very small population. So having large governments spreading the wealth around is very important, isn't it?
And we have a lot in common when it comes to weather, like very cold, harsh winters, extremely cold winters, and extremely hot in summer. I don't know about Canada. How is it in summer? But
well, it depends sort of where you are, I guess. But it's probably comparable in many regards.
Yeah.
I mean, especially if you're kind of center of the country.
Exactly.
So if we were to get back to IELTS, so if we talk about then, so it sounds like you had access to English speaking tutors and influences when you were preparing for the exam. Now, would you say that a lot of the studying you did specific to IELTS, was it done independently?
No, good question. Well, I guess yes. I never joined any courses for the IELTS preparation because back 5 years ago, I even didn't know about them and was trying because I'm studying at the Department of Foreign Languages, why should I go to any courses? Because I'm able to do it by myself. Yeah, so I was doing it by myself all the time. Never joined any courses.
Okay, so that's really interesting, and I think that applies to a lot of candidates around the world. I think that what you're going to tell us how you prepared is very helpful to people that maybe are pursuing the same or are in the same environment where they're trying to prepare for the exam by themselves. So can you tell us what were some of the strategies that you used when you were working by yourself to improve your skills in an IELTS context?
Okay, very good question. And I think for all the candidates around the world who are listening to this, I'm trying to give some ideas about what I was doing and I find efficient nowadays. I guess nowadays there are a lot of materials, resources, websites, podcasts, just like yours, for example, which, by the way, is a very good one. And but the problem is to choose a good one, Ryan, what I'm talking about. Because resources, like millions of resources, websites, but you need to choose a really good one if you decide to stick to one teacher, like let it be Ryan or Liz, IELTS Liz was very famous.
Yep.
So first of all, maybe try to choose one teacher. Just I'm advising for those who are just going to take IELTS exam in the future. When it comes to my preparation, and let's start with listening because it goes first. Listening exam.
Yep.
As I told you, I got 8.5 in the listening test, and it was pretty easy for me, listening test. And I guess all the candidates should use only one thing, which is very efficient and useful. It's BBC. It's very simple. It's very traditional advice, but it works. I just recommend all the people to download a very simple application. It's available both on Android and iOS. It is called BBC News, the red one application. And what you can do there, you just go and find the tab which is called live. It means listening live to the radio, And a person just needs to be exposed to listening all the time, even like 5 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day, doesn't matter. The more you listen, the better you understand. And like even after a week, a person, even who has a low command of English, after a week, because he listens all the time to the same phrases like, welcome to BBC World Service, this is Shaima Khalil, I'm from Pakistan, this kind of phrases. After a week of repetitive phrases, you start understanding these people. And what is more important, you understand the accent of these journalists, correspondents, whatever. Because, in IELTS listening, it's either British or Australian accent, as far as I know. And when it comes to listening to BBC, it's just like the same thing that you're listening to IELTS listening. And just a few days ago, I found out a very interesting thing. Like, some people have a very natural British accent, just like a famous actor called Rowan Atkinson. Mr. Bean, if you know. A very famous comedian actor. So when he speaks, it's like a very natural, a very British, which is called, I guess it's called Royal English, right? Royal English. So this one is very nice, amazing. And the second advice I would give to the candidates is that they could play listening, radio on BBC, and take a piece of paper and just for 1 minute, write down every word or phrase that they hear, understand. Just do it for 1 minute and do it on a daily basis. And by doing this way, people will be able to manage a great amount of information and train their speeds and other skills.
Yeah, that is a very good strategy. That's a strategy actually I also recommend to people when they're preparing is to keep some kind of language journal. And it should be, like you're saying, the phrases that you hear when you're consuming general world English, especially if they're kind of new or if they're somewhat uncertain to you.
Exactly.
Because what ends up happening is you start to create this database of language that is in your it's not in your comfort zone, really. It's outside of your comfort zone for the way that you're using English on a day-to-day basis. But it helps you to expand your comfort zone because as you review the language, after 1 or 2 weeks and you've got maybe, say, 2-3 pages full of these new phrases, it helps you learn how to incorporate these phrases into your language. And it's not one of these things where you're listening to the radio, a new phrase comes up, and then you don't write it down, and then you never use it again. It just kind of disappears. And so that's obviously not helpful. But if you're keeping a journal, then you can slowly bring this into your own language. Yeah, so that's a really good tip, Sultan. So you were taking paper and you were writing down phrases as you heard them.
Phrases, yeah, words, whatever. Just use traditional paper things. Take a pencil or pen and write them down all the time. Then after a week or like a month, you will know these phrases for sure. And when you listen them in IELTS exam, you will be thankful for this, like you are listening to BBC. And for many candidates who recommend maybe, like I heard a lot of strategies, like watching movies and this kind of stuff. I doubt about this because when you watch movies, you see the picture, and even if you don't understand like what they are saying, what they are talking about, you can guess by their pictures, by the context, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But when you listen to an IELTS exam, there is no picture. You just listen to the voice of the speakers. So when it comes to movies, I have a lot of doubts about this.
Mm-hmm.
Or especially like some people, especially I remember when I was in China, a lot of Chinese students, you know, they're crazy about studying. They take one, for example, TV series like Big Bang Theory, you know, this famous guy called Sheldon, a kind of freak, and they're trying to copy or mimic his language. It's a bit crazy.
Yeah, I've seen those programs as well.
Yeah.
When I was living in Shanghai, I remember there was a very popular sort of boxed series that you could buy. It was the Friends TV show, and you sort of you watch the TV show, and it would pause, and then you'd repeat what the friend said,
Yes,
or the character in Friends said, and sort of practice your language that way. Yeah, those. So, what's your opinion of that approach? What do you think?
I guess it is not really helpful one because a lot of people they're crazy about the accents, having the Canadian or British, American accent. But in IELTS, let's say speaking exam, the accent doesn't matter at all. It is not assessed at all. So whatever accent you have, Russian, Chinese, American, it doesn't matter. So it's not really been useful. And I guess it is more essential to focus on vocabulary and grammar rather than just having a nice sound in like Royal English, whatever. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah. Okay, so that's interesting.
One more thing is I want to say about watching movies. You got to be careful when choosing what kind of movies to watch because movies are different. And for example, if you're preparing for IELTS exam, I guess watching movies about 50 cents with their English isn't really a helpful one because this is not IELTS English. Let's say this way.
Yeah.
So this kind of rap stuff, you don't need this kind of English. It won't appear in IELTS listening.
You run the risk as well of picking up some phrases that actually would not fit into your context at all. It would be informal English or even offensive. Yeah,
even offensive one, like most of the time.
Yeah. Okay, great. So that's a very nice rundown of how you prepared for listening. Is there anything extra that you wanted to add?
I guess no. The question is not about how many things you have, like how efficient they are. So I guess the BBC is the best one, or the best one.
Well, maybe we can move to the writing score that you received. So you got band 7.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I'm guessing that you must have taken the academic exam if this was for the purpose of getting into your master's degree.
That's right, yes. Academic writing. Okay. So having writing task 1, writing task 2, graph and essay.
Okay. So do you want to share with us how you prepared for that part of the exam?
Yeah, of course. So when I was preparing, it was a bit long ago, I was checking some websites, which is called IELTS exam net, I guess. At that time, it was a very famous one. Liz probably didn't exist even at that time. So I was just checking sample model answers given by other candidates or other teachers. This strategy is very popular. A lot of people use it all the time. But I'm going to talk about my experience because, well, I must say that I have a good background when it comes to writing essays because we were studying Russian literature very thoroughly and we were writing, multiple essays all the time. So I had a very good experience of writing essays in Russian and then translating them into English isn't a big deal for me, So writing essays for me is the best part, actually. I enjoy writing essays.
Actually, that's if we could just talk about that point for 1 second. That's an interesting point because what I've noticed with the candidates that I've worked with from different parts of the world is not everybody actually has the experience of writing an essay in their native language. I mean, some people are coming to the IELTS and they're not really familiar with essentially, how to organize their writing into larger chunks, like chunks by paragraph, let's say.
I understand.
So I'm guessing that if I imagine pretty much anywhere across the Russian-speaking world, it's quite similar. I mean, did your essay structures map on almost exactly to when you went to write your IELTS essays? Were they pretty much essentially the same as a Russian essay?
Usually
It's structured by something.
when we write in Russian language, it's much longer. As for the words,
Mm-hmm.
like if in IELTS essay it's 250, in Russian it might be 1,000 words. So we're writing quite a lot here. And it's not about this structure. It's about how able you are to develop your ideas. How you just
Mm-hmm.
pick a topic and develop ideas, provide examples, and make logical connections. I guess this is the most important what Russian literature teacher gave me, to be
Mm-hmm.
able to structure, well organize ideas and develop them.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so then what was the main challenge that you had in your preparation for writing task 2?
I guess at that time I didn't know about the assessment criteria. That's my problem, because now I'm fully aware of what examiner is seeking in my answer. And so because at that time, and this is the problem that I'm challenging all the time, because now I'm teaching here as well, since I graduated. And the problem, here, Ryan, maybe you have some advice as well. I notice in China, here in Kazakhstan, like most of the people, they are concerned about the ideas when they're writing. They are given a certain topic to write about, and they think about the ideas. That as we have publicly available writing assessment criteria, the ideas are not assessed. So because a lot of candidates, they are worried about the ideas, how cool they are, how logical, like not logical, how interesting and cool they are. But as far as I know, the ideas are not assessed and they're not important at all. You can have a very basic idea, but still get band 7 or even 8 with the simple ideas, but which are thoroughly organized, well structured, with a good grammar and vocabulary.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there. It is a language exam at the end of the day,
Exactly,
so it's not really the same as writing an essay for a university degree where the ideas are everything then, and the arguments that you're making are everything. I mean, obviously the examiner wants to see some sort of progression to the essay, and in the case of an argument essay, there should be points that support your central position. But you're right. I mean, it's fundamentally what they're looking for is, can you communicate an idea in written English? And I think you're right that that's where a lot of candidates get into trouble. I mean, the way that the mark works, it's kind of like a house of cards where the different parts of the mark uphold other parts of the mark. So, for example, if you're incapable of writing a grammatically accurate sentence, well, then there's no way that you can get a strong score for being a coherent writer. Because first you have to be able to at least deliver an idea, and then it builds on that. So is it a coherent idea, or does this idea link to another idea in the essay? And then on top of that, you've got, okay, well, how strong was the overall fulfillment of the task?
Yes.
So different parts of the mark kind of play together. So I agree with you that your point here is the candidate should know how the mark is created.
Exactly, the assessment criteria.
And that's a very fundamental tip to candidates listening is, how do you score well in writing? Well, you have to know exactly what is going to get you marks and what is going to make you give you a strong performance versus a weak performance. So what would you suggest candidates do if they want to know more about how the mark works?
Okay, so all the candidates, they just need to go to the Google or whatever they use, browser, and type writing task 2 assessment criteria public version. And there they will find that the examiner uses 4 criteria, like task response, this kind of stuff, grammatical range and accuracy, lexical resource, and coherence, cohesion. So these are the 4 things that they need to pay attention to, because there are a lot of myths about IELTS exam. It's kind of funny when you hear this kind of stuff, like blah blah blah. This is important. Is it important? How about my ideas? Like, since I'm teaching here these days, I hear a lot of funny things about IELTS essays. Like, a lot of people are concerned about ideas, and I keep telling them, like, ignore your ideas. Examiner doesn't care about how interesting they are, how cool they are, because this is, as you said, language test. It's not IQ test and this kind of things. Because IELTS, it's international English language system, not other, not IQ or whatever.
Yeah. So then you Googled and you found the public band descriptors chart, which, yeah, I agree with you, absolutely critical to any candidate to be familiar with the different, what is the examiner looking for the different bands.
Like not
across
not to waste their attention and time, because preparation time, some candidates, they wasted paying attention to non-essential parts. Like myths, myths about IELTS, or a lot of things like, one person said this, other person said this, I heard some people say this, is it true or not? This kind of stuff. So I always tell them, go to this criteria and ask yourself, do these things match to the criteria or not? If they don't match, then it's like, ignore this. It's kind of unnecessary stuff.
Yeah. Absolutely. Okay, and anything else then for writing that you feel candidates should be aware of?
Writing. Yeah, I guess for the writing task 1, when it comes to graphs, like, people should know that there are only 6 types of graphs, and one goes with numbers, and the second type of this task goes without numbers. I mean, without numbers, it's like map and process.
Yeah.
And with numbers, like table, pie chart, line graph, and bar chart. And again, like, focus on simple things like IELTS writing task 1, unlike task 2, doesn't require a candidate to give an opinion about what they see. If they see, like, for example, according to the chart, it is clearly seen that most of the candidates chose medicine and dentistry last year. Okay, that's a correct sentence. However, if they write, I think it's because doctors get a lot of money, well, that's not a good sentence, because it gives your opinion. And never write your opinion in IELTS writing task 1.
Right. No, that's good advice. So to be aware of the different sources. I mean, I think that it's helpful to candidates to stay abreast of what's being reported on IELTS.org, on the official website, because some things do come up that sometimes I feel like candidates, when they find out they have to take an IELTS, the first thing they do is they go to YouTube and they start searching for apps, which is an important thing to do. But I mean, it's also very important to see, what is the latest version of the exam, and what can I expect to happen on the exam when I get into the exam room. So if you go to IELTS.org, they have lots of PDFs that you can download and leaf through. And actually changes do happen.
Brian, if you let me, I'd like to add more thing about writing.
Oh, please.
So when we see the check criteria, the first criteria both for writing task 1 and task 2, it's called task response or task achievement. Doesn't matter, because the idea is the same. That is very important, because a lot of candidates, I notice, they ignore this part, task response and task achievement, which basically means answer the question that IELTS is asking you. Just don't go off topic. Don't go off topic. That's a problem that many candidates suffer from. They're trying to go off topic, especially when it comes to writing an essay. They are asked about, for example, discussing both views, discuss one view and second view. And a lot of candidates, they have no structure. They just think about ideas, think about vocabulary, but they don't think about the structure and the question itself. Many candidates, they ignore this. So what I'm suggesting to do is take a question, for example, essay question, underline the keywords, just a simple strategy I'm using. Take a question, underline keywords, then find some synonyms to these keywords. Because throughout your essay, you're going to use synonyms. If you don't do that, then it means your vocabulary is limited, and you can't paraphrase the questions, you can't paraphrase the vocabulary, which means you have a limited words. And the examiner, of course, definitely will see that throughout your essay.
So if we talk about then the speaking, so I get this feeling, I mean, I'm not sure what happened in the exam, because your speaking seems to be at a much higher level than band 6. So I don't know if it's improved since that time or.
Thank you.
So, I mean, let's just talk then about how you prepared for the speaking examination and how you're helping your students today prepare for the speaking.
Okay, thank you for the question. Again, back 5 years ago, I didn't know about the criteria that they exist,
Okay. See, that's the thing, is that sometimes it's technical, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
it could be somebody who has the skills, but it's just they weren't really anticipating the format of the exam, and then that impacts their mark.
IELTS exam is about knowing the tricks and knowing about the criteria.
Yep.
It's not always about the language. Of course, that's very important, but knowing the techniques and what is being assessed, that's the most important. So talking about my experience 5 years ago, I remember when I was taking exam, I thought like, well, since I'm studying the Department of Foreign Languages, just having a conversation in English isn't the problem. And I went into the room talking to the examiner, by the way, who was Indian guy. And he was asking me, like, of course, this like traditional questions. I answered all of them. And I thought, well, the answer was great. I would definitely get at least 7. But when my results came out, I got 6, was a bit disappointed with them. But now I understand, of course, I didn't know about the criteria, which are, again, candidates can Google and find speaking assessment criteria, public version, and they will find out what is being assessed in the exam. I didn't know about those things at all. Again, it's like the problem with writing and speaking is the same, because all the candidates, like not all of them, but a great number of them, they are thinking about the ideas, how interesting they are, how cool they are, and they mix and they misunderstand that it's English, it's language exam. It's not interview to get a job. It's not your professional skills like testing, something like that. They misunderstand it. For example, just let me give a simple example. Examiner is asking you a question in part 1. Let's talk about weekends or like whatever. How often do you go to the gym, for example? He's asking me about this. How often do you go to the gym? And a lot of candidates start thinking about really, is it like twice or 3 times a week? And they start hesitating. And that's a problem, because in part 1, you're not supposed to hesitate. And examiner doesn't care about how often do you go to the gym, because he wants to listen the kind of phrases which goes to time, like twice a week, 3 times a week, not very often, always, never, this kind of things. How often? If he's asking you how often, he wants to hear this kind of language. So focus on this, rather than saying like, people start saying something like, I like gym, or whatever, I don't like gym, instead of saying, I never go to the gym, for example. Or if examiner is asking you, for example, when was it the last time you went on a trip? Obviously, he wants to check your ability to use past simple, because he's asking you, when was the last trip you went on a trip? And candidates start answering like, I will travel to Europe next year, for example, or I don't like traveling. They answered in the wrong tense. Maybe that was my mistake when I took IELTS exam 5 years ago. I think these were my biggest mistakes. I didn't focus on the question, like what he really wanted me to say.
Oh, that's interesting insight. Yeah. So, I mean, making sure that you're responding precisely to what the examiner is saying.
Yes.
And I think it's okay to expand on the answer, of course, but fundamentally the question has to be answered accurately.
Yes. If he's asking you this kind of things, like if you were a leader in your community, what changes would you address? Of course, he's asking you about hypothetically, like if he wants you to use conditional. So like what tells the difference between candidate like band 5 and band 7 is the grammar and vocabulary mostly. Because most of the time people have no problems with pronunciation. All the people can pronounce the words correctly. Not all the people, but majority of people. But when it comes to grammar and vocabulary, that's where you need to show off, of course. Having a speaking exam.
Yeah. Do you remember what your part 2, what the prompt was for you to speak about?
It's a hard question. Because
several years ago.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly. Probably it was something about job, I guess. Describe a job, something about a job. Because
it's interesting how the topics do recycle, though. I've been looking into that recently because there are some websites out there that are very helpful pool of historical topics. For example, Simone's work at IELTS-blog.com. Yeah, I mean, if you just go to her website, and you can find the topics, the speaking topics for the past however long she's been running the website now. I think it's probably up to maybe 12 years. I think it's been online now. So
Amazing.
Huge pool of the topics. And then the funny thing is that you can see patterns. Some of the topics and some of the specific questions are repeating.
Yeah.
So that doesn't mean that you're going to, if you look at her website, that you're definitely going to see those questions on your upcoming exam. But I think for some candidates, it can be helpful to familiarize themselves with what has been asked before, what types of questions,
yes,
are
very
asked.
Good points. Yeah. And I'd like to add some points to this, what you said.
Please.
For those candidates who are preparing for the speaking parts, of course, there are a lot of problems, but when you are preparing for the exam, it's not to spend like 2 years preparing for the IELTS exam. It's just how efficient your strategy is, and what you can do is like to make up, let's say, I call them big topics. What do I mean by big topics? Like, for example, for the speaking, of course, the questions are not repeated. They are rephrased all the time. What you just said, I totally agree with you. Because you can't really like create new things. They are already existing things like environment, let's say hobby, family, this kind of stuff. Entertainment industry, for example. So what I'm trying to recommend is like candidates make up a kind of list of vocabulary. For example, topic is sport. They take a simple piece of paper, like A4 format, and they write down in the middle, sport. And in the whole list, they write down all the vocabulary they have about this topic, sport. And when it comes to speaking exam, there might be thousands of different questions. However, the topic will be sport. And if they are familiar with this vocabulary about sport, they will be able to answer any question about this topic. So they need to prepare maybe 15 or 20 pieces of paper, like A4 format, with big topics. And how to think about these big topics, they can Google them, or they can think about this logically, because it's very simple. Like, to my mind comes like environment, very traditional topic, technology, education, health, this kind of very traditional stuff.
No, it's a great tip. Yeah, it is like that, isn't it? That sometimes the candidate might be very, very strong, but then there's one lexical pool that perhaps for whatever reason they didn't really visit in their preparation, and it can really just throw them off. I've had experiences like that myself as a Chinese language learner when I was living in China. Is that I'd be proficient in day-to-day activities, and in certain specific contexts I was fine. But then I'd walk into a bank and essentially could not communicate with anyone because I didn't have bank-specific lexicon to work with. And I think that candidates get into that trap a little bit too. So your exercise of finding these big topics and make sure the candidate making sure that they're exercising and are aware of word pools that they know for these big topics can be really helpful in preparing them for an unseen question or an unanticipated question in the exam. Yeah, it's a great strategy.
And as for the speaking part too, I noticed that a lot of topics, maybe half of them devoted to people. For example, like describe a person that you admire, describe a person who speaks a foreign language well, etc. So my idea is to prepare, I would say, a couple of answers, like 2 answers, 2 people. Think about 2 people, maybe 1 female and 1 male. One is very famous, like superstar, and 1 person from your family or whoever you want to talk about, friend, husband, wife, son, doesn't matter. And when you will be asked about people, you will use all the time the same answer, but just polish it when you prepare for the exam. For example, in a class, you talk about you talk about a person you respect. Talk about, let's say you choose Uncle Sam, and the topic goes like, describe a person you respect. Talk about Uncle Sam. Then the topic changes. Talk about a person who speaks foreign language well. Talk about the same Uncle Sam. So just adjust your one answer to the topic. but you will improve it all the time. You improve your answer all the time, add some nice vocabulary and grammar, like conditionals, modals, and etc. And in the end of the day, you will get like a perfect answer. So that's my
that's
idea.
great advice, yeah.
Instead of like preparing different answers all the time, talk about the person you respect. You have to think about this. Then you change the topic, you think about another person. That's a bit challenging, especially like within a minute, you're supposed to provide an answer. That's a bit tough, even in your own language, not saying in English. So preparation is essential. And I would recommend definitely for the people to prepare 2 answers, 2 people, 1 male, 1 female, and polish this answer all the time. Practice it all the time. And for those, I guess, anticipating some other things, maybe candidates will say, like, I don't have a speaking partner, I live in Bangladesh, and etc. I live in China, whatever. Maybe they can use some other things, like talking to, for example, when, staying in China, I heard one interesting advice from a girl. She said, I printed out a picture of a foreigner and I talked to him like he was an examiner. So that's, I would say to all the candidates who are preparing, if you don't have access to English-speaking people, just print out someone and imagine that this is an examiner and give your answers to him. That's one idea. Second, of course, you can go to the mirror, talk to a mirror until you believe yourself. Talk about the person you respect and give an answer to yourself. Look into the mirror until you believe yourself.
And how about strategies that involve either recording yourself as audio or recording yourself as video? Would you use those as all or recommend them?
I recommend to use audio recordings. That's the part, because later they can always come back to this answer and listen to themselves again and say, here that was a mistake. Here I could talk about some other things. The next time I'm going to say this phrase or this word. That's very essential. And of course, as a part of this, the candidates can exchange these recordings with each other. And in my classes, I encourage them to work in pairs and give feedback to each other. That proved to be efficient, actually. When they work in pairs and give each other answer for the speaking part too, then they exchange feedback. That's very essential. Even if you don't have a partner, you can take family member, you can take a cat or whoever, whatever, it doesn't matter actually. If people say, where there is a will, there is a way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we've gone over a few of the different speaking strategies. So what else would you suggest? Are there any? Maybe we could talk about even part 3, which is more of a conversation style or interview style.
Yes.
Is there anything you could suggest for candidates that want to prepare for that section?
Okay, so just candidates should be aware that all the parts of the exam are checking some kind of skills, some kind of grammar, vocabulary, and in part 1, exam is checking pronouns, like personal pronouns. Usually it's I, me, my, myself, mine, because the questions go like talk about your hobby, your work, whatever. In part 2, exam is checking this pronouns like he, she, it, because the topics is describe a person, describe a time, a situation. So the pronouns will be like he, she, it, and it's like their derivatives, like his, her, etc. In part 3, the questions are general, and candidates should be aware that they should use always like we or they, something like general, not specific. Talk about people in general. Never say like I, or like try to avoid these kind of things, saying I. Instead say they or people, generally, usually, these kind of things. And
no, that's it. Yeah, that's interesting insight.
Yeah, I realized it later. Maybe these were my mistakes 5 years ago when I ignored this stuff because I didn't know about them. Like examiners checking different kind of things. And the most important one, of course, listen to the examiner. Because he, okay. So I believe that in 5 years ago, I didn't score really well because I didn't know about examiner, and he's asking you about the grammar that he's checking. And in part 3, they usually want you to talk generally, like If you talk generally, the pronouns will be they, people, something in general, this kind of stuff. Not to using like I or stuff like that. Trying to avoid using I in the part 3.
Yeah, it does get like that. I mean, part 3 becomes a bit more abstract, and I think that's
exactly.
when you would see questions like, how do you think your town could improve itself, or how do you think your town could attract more tourism? It's these more bigger abstract ideas, checking a wider variety of language types and grammar. Yeah, that's it's actually in the way that it's structured, it's helpful to the candidate because it kind of warms you up a little bit. It starts with sort of the basic chit chat, like you were saying, about yourself and your own situation, and then part 2, it kind of you're speaking about something you're going to be familiar with. Usually, it's somebody that you know, or it's asking you to explain a situation that you had, or something like that. And then it's when it gets to the more abstract. So when you'd probably be expected to use modals, you'd be kind of explaining maybe circumstantial situations. Yeah.
And for the part 3, I guess it's the most difficult one, part 3. Because part 1 is very simple. I call it warm up. Like you are preparing yourself and examiner for the most difficult part 2 and part 3. Part 2, because you have some time to prepare. You have 1 minute, even it's not long, of course, but you can write something down. But part 3, the questions are very general and they're very difficult, and they require you to think for a while because the questions are not simple even in your native language. They are abstract, as you said. Totally agree. And you can't give only one word answer because like how your city could be improved in the future, you can't say one word like roads.
Yeah, absolutely.
You have to develop. And secondly, again, I'd like to highlight this: listen to the examiner carefully. That's very important. Because if he wants, for example, the question, has your hometown changed since you were a kid? This kind of very popular questions in part 3. Yeah. Has your hometown changed? If the examiner is asking you this question, he wants to check your ability to use present perfect. And if candidate says like, for some other things like it didn't change, maybe that's not good, because it's better to use present perfect, like it hasn't changed a lot or it hasn't changed dramatically. By doing this, you show the examiner that you're able to use present perfect, and probably you are worth band 7 or higher.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very good advice.
So that's the part where a lot of candidates are missing, because they focus on the content. Again, just going back to your question, like how your city could be improved. And they start thinking about the problems of their city, or like there are no roads, there are no infrastructure. But examiner doesn't care about this. Again, guys, listen up, eh? Examiner doesn't care about your city and how it could be improved. He cares about 4 criteria and always go back to them, like fluency, coherence, this kind of stuff, pronunciation, lexical resource, and grammar.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it's important to use the time that you have to fill it with accurate language and not fill it with you trying to think of something that is accurate to your city. Yeah, it's like you said, the examiner really doesn't actually care about your city. They want to care about how well you're able to string together a coherent sentence.
And just in this part, I'd like again to go back what I said before, making up answers. If you like, for example, if the question is unfamiliar for you, or you haven't never done this or thought about that before, just make up a sentence, make up an idea. Because again, if it's asked an unusual question about a person, for example, like who speaks a lot of foreign languages, but you don't have such a person in your surroundings, just make up one.
Yeah.
Or like use some stories from the internet, or use from stories your friends, relatives, whoever. Like you can always say, I don't know about the answer, but I heard, I read, and I watched a movie, documentary. Because a lot of candidates, they worry about these things if they ask the question and they have no expertise or no experience. But I always keep telling them that, guys, remember that's a speaking exam. It's not IQ test. Even if you don't have an answer, just say, I don't know the answer. I'm not sure, but I guess it might be this or that. Speculate.
I think it's important though too that if candidates, I mean, candidates should probably anticipate they might be in that situation.
Mm-hmm.
So part of their study strategy should include practicing kind of coming up with ideas on the spot, so that you don't
Like
want the first
improvising, yeah,
experience
improvising.
of that strategy to be in the exam room, right?
Totally agree. Yeah, improvising is very essential, very important. Improvise and talk to mirror or talk to a picture of a foreigner. If you don't have, talk to your cat, whoever.
Yeah, yeah, hmm yeah. I heard something funny from another IELTS instructor. This is years and years ago, but he was working with a candidate, and she was Chinese,
Yeah,
and
oh,
she was
nice.
talking. So her strategy was to speak English sort of at her mother, who could not speak any English at all. And then it was sort of funny because then after a few weeks of doing this, the trainer asked her, "So has your language improved?" And she said, "A little bit, but my mom's has improved incredibly." Because, excuse me,
A lot
because
of
I guess
funny things, yeah.
the mom was starting to pick up some of the language because it was getting spoken at her so much. But it was kind of funny. But yeah, no, you're right. I mean, these strategies are very helpful. And I think that the fundamental thing is the candidate does not want to go into the examination completely unfamiliar with the territory and with what they're going to actually have to do. They want to know how the exam is marked. They want to know what sorts of questions they can anticipate for each section of the exam. And then with regards to actually speaking in response, they should have done lots of practice and preparation for all varieties of situations. So situations in which they're ready for the answer, like you said, with the being ready with maybe a story about your uncle, or just knowing, having just some general language rules around your uncle, and then situations where they might not have anybody, so they'll have to make up something on the spot. So they should be able to
improvise,
deal with that situation.
Yeah.
And so, do you want to tell me a bit about what you're doing in Kazakhstan with your IELTS project?
Yes. Well, to be honest, I have a website also, and they're trying to work with Russian-speaking society who is preparing for IELTS exam.
Great.
That's one part. Recently, like a few days ago, I started to make some videos. Of course, amateur, but anyway. And Kazakhstan, because Kazakhstan market, like even not Kazakhstan, like Russian-speaking market is kind of open. It's not covered with IELTS teachers with Russian background. And I'm teaching at university right now in one of the cities here in Karaganda. It's not far from our capital. And these candidates are preparing for PhD degree. And last year, our Minister of Education issued an order that all the people who want to apply for PhD, they must have IELTS certificate.
Oh, okay.
So I'm kind of in demand here.
Yeah, it sounds like it, yeah.
So
I guess that in part explains a lot of the huge demand that I've seen for jobs in Kazakhstan.
Really?
With regards to, you see a lot of that actually on the job boards. There are many positions in Kazakhstan with regards to training people for IELTS, and I think they want, maybe native English speakers for certain specific projects that might be part of a larger push for certain demographics within Kazakhstan to improve their language skills. But I've noticed that it's just Kazakhstan is coming up more and more in these job forums, and I think that's really very, very cool that your minister is sort of open and encouraging people to become multilingual in that way. And
Ryan, can we talk maybe about reading parts, because we missed this?
Oh, sure, yes, yeah. I didn't mean to gloss over that, but sure.
Reading exam, because a lot of candidates from around the world, I noticed they get 9 in reading exam. I don't know why, but it's pretty surprising. Like reading exactly, not listening, not speaking, not writing, but reading, people get 9. I got 6. It was kind of low score, but again, 5 years ago, I didn't know anything about the kind of questions, about the structures, about the time management. Once you're given like 3 texts and you're given only 60 minutes to work with them. And I'd like to combine with listening because when you go to BBC News, this application I recommended earlier, you'll find that it is available not only radio, but also thousands of articles available. And what you guys can do, like I'm addressing to the candidates, that you can read these articles on a daily basis and try to choose the topics that are written under the category of science, technology, climate change, this kind of stuff. Don't read the articles about, let's say, Trump or football, because this kind of text usually never appear in IELTS reading. They are mostly technical. So you can choose these categories, like I said, science, technology, climate change, and focus on them. Read them all the time. And this is what I'm actually recommending my students. Just choose one article and work it thoroughly in terms of vocabulary and underline new words, phrases. And after they have done this exercise, I ask them to write the content about this article using one sentence. So like kind of, the overall idea. It's also training them to analyze it critically and give the main content of the article, which is an essential skill in the reading exam.
Yes, for sure. Do you ever use British Council material? They have a wide variety of materials online and some really good podcasts. So I'm just trying to extend. So you were talking about BBC reading the articles. That could be very, very helpful. And as an extension to that, I mean, do you use these British Council tools at all?
Well, to be honest, I don't do that. I use other things. I use official Cambridge books. Like they recommend candidates to use like practice tests, and I highly recommend to the candidates. Maybe don't do other texts, because quite often the texts given in other websites, they're not close to real IELTS exam questions.
Yeah,
and you're preparing yourself for the wrong kinds of questions. And once you come to exam, you will be surprised. Guys, I haven't prepared for this type of questions, but they appear. That's my advice.
Yeah, and I've actually seen some textbook series that are, excuse me, entitled or geared towards IELTS, but then you open them up and you look at what's inside of them, and once again, it's not really in keeping with the examination. For example, sometimes I find IELTS textbooks. It can be helpful to stage the studying, so maybe use one smaller paragraph and then answer questions about that paragraph. But then you see some textbook series where all of the reading exercises are smaller paragraphs. So none of the exercises are those extended long readings that you get on an actual IELTS. And I don't find that is, that might be helpful for certain exercise types, but it should be part of a larger study strategy, which includes actually doing some real practice IELTS papers, like what you're saying. Yeah, those official Cambridge books, it's hard to beat them really, because you have, the exact replica of items that you might see in the exam.
Yes, totally agree with you. And so guys, please be very careful when choosing the text to practice.
Yeah.
And one more thing I'd like to highlight, like the candidates should be aware of the types of the questions and their time management. What do I mean by this is like, of course, there are certain types of questions in IELTS reading, and you can find them online. But first, you have to do very easy tasks. Those that are called summary, so-called summary tasks, where you need to find one or two words from the text and write them down, and to complete the gaps. So I highly recommend to do this first, because it's easier one. You just need to use keywords and go back to the text and find this part and then choose it. And sometimes, usually most of the candidates, they don't need 9. So I highly recommend to choose the questions that you are not going to do and save your time, because some of the questions require you to read the whole text, and even if you do, it doesn't necessarily mean that you will answer the question correctly. And all the 40 questions, they worth only 1 score. So maybe it's not worth wasting your time just to get 1 score and reading for 10 minutes. So allocate your time carefully and choose the questions from the very beginning that you are not going to do. Maybe we call it, choose it by chance. For example, multiple choice A, B, C, D. Leave these questions for the end, especially if it requires you to read the whole text, and maybe do it later.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are good strategies.
For the true, false, and given, of course, you remember, guys, that they go in order, usually never, but 95% they go in order. So if you have a question, for example, 5 in paragraph B, it means question 4 will be earlier, somewhere earlier. Question 6 will be later.
Yeah.
This kind of simple strategies, but sometimes candidates might ignore this. And the most critical about reading, speaking, writing, listening, it's vocabulary. Again, I always highlight this vocabulary because in listening and reading, all the time the examiners, like those who make the test, they use paraphrasing. They use synonyms all the time. And that's the most crucial, that candidates should know a lot of words and the synonyms to them. That's very essential.
Yeah. I think also, I think it's more to do with listening, but sometimes the exam will set up some traps for the candidate as well. Yeah, so it is important that you are familiar with sort of the variety of language that would fit that specific topic, right? Because then sometimes something will happen, and then in the next couple of seconds they'll add in a few other words that would change the answer. And so they're trying to trap the candidate in a way, or trying to test whether they are listening to the entire idea, or whether they're listening specifically for, they're listening too specifically and not listening to what the context of the conversation is giving.
And I'd like to recommend one application for the candidates, except for BBC. It is called Quizlet. Have you heard about this?
Quizlet?
Yes.
I have heard of it, yes. But do you want to explain in case someone hasn't?
So Quizlet, guys, it's kind of application where it has two parts, like quiz and let, L-E-T. I'll spell it Q-U-I-Z-L-E-T. And this is a very simple application. It's free, by the way. And where you can practice the vocabulary. You can create your own vocabulary. And for example, English, Russian in my case, or in your case, it can be different, English, Chinese, or whatever. And there are like 6 or 7 ways to practice in the same vocabulary. It is pretty useful. And by the way, you can use other people's already prepared materials. Like you just type IELTS, for example, and you'll find a lot of flashcards about this topic, where you can create your own and practice them all the time, like wherever you are. Because we spend our life everywhere, for example, in the traffic, somewhere at home, and when you have free time, you can practice this vocabulary, which will pay off in the future. Trust me. Like you do practice Quizlet, and that will pay off.
And so this is a vocab specific application that people can use to continuously review their understanding of certain lexical items.
Exactly. And I always say vocabulary is the key to IELTS success.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so anything extra that you wanted to add for the reading section?
Well, for the reading, maybe something traditional, like you guys go to the websites of some magazines, scientific magazines, like National Geographic or The Economist, the British journal, which is very popular, very famous. You can, let's say in Kazakhstan, still quite popular, or in other Russian-speaking world, like download them somewhere, like torrent trackers, they're called special websites, where you can download them some kind of illegally, and read them all the time, review vocabulary again. So go to, read these scientific journals like National Geographic, The Economist, The Scientists. That's enough, I think.
Yep. Okay, great. Yeah, there's no shortage of helpful materials out there now that we are all connected on the internet. Okay, so I'd like to ask you about the website then, and so about your new project.
Okay.
So what is this website then?
Do you want me to send the link?
Sure.
Ryan, actually, these days I have some problems with my website because it's changing the server. It goes to a new server.
Okay.
But I can tell you about this website.
Yeah, sure. Just tell us about it, because I think when people hear this recording, it might give you a nice little bit of traffic. So let's talk about the website a bit.
Okay, thank you. So it's devoted for IELTS preparation, for English studying. I put there some tests on, again, about vocabulary. I share some of my ideas how to prepare for this exam, and Yeah, you can go there and do some practice tests about listening or vocabulary. Yeah, doing vocabulary to read some other stories from other people. It's not wholly developed to IELTS preparation. There are some other stuff like how to prepare for the civil service. So it's like my own blog. Yeah, devoted fully
Okay,
to
great.
Russian-speaking society.
Yeah, I think that, IELTS is obviously a very, very vast ecosystem, and I think, the different people that get involved in it are helpful to different sorts of communities. So it sounds like you're sharing a personal experience as a guy who grew up in a Russian-speaking country, and I think that the tools that you're developing, it sounds like, could be helpful to people that are specifically in that context, and perhaps well. But yeah, yes. So you said that you have a video series.
I just made 4 of them, like how to register for IELTS exam, 2 videos, and 2 listening practice tasks. It's on my YouTube, not a website.
Okay, and what's the YouTube name?
YouTube. I will send you the link.
Okay.
For my videos. But again, they are in Russian, just to see.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah. Well, it's helpful to the Russian community for sure.
I'll send you. Did you get it?
Oh, great. Yes, I've got it here. So what is there a username that you wanted to say in the recording?
Okay, you guys, you can find me by Sultan Rahimjanov. Sultan is my first name. Rahimjanov is my family name, just in case.
And how do you spell that? Your family name?
It's Rahimjanov.
Okay. So is that R-A-K?
Yes, RAKHIMZHANOV. It's a bit long.
Okay, great. Okay, so people can search for you there.
Yeah, thanks for advertisement. Okay.
Oh, that's okay. No problem. I think, we might as well, use, I think we're probably going to help each other in this conversation. So, it's nice to have a bit of a crossover between the audiences.
Sure. From different cultures, from around the world. Like, internet is amazing stuff here. You are in UAE and I'm here in Kazakhstan. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I know. The world is really small now, isn't it?
Yeah, it is amazing having the ability to communicate with people around the world. And exchange experience, culture, advice, study together to make the world better.
I guess when it comes to being a Russian speaker, a Kazakh speaker, what would be some specific pronunciation challenges and how would you overcome them?
Oh, okay, that's a good question. Well, when it comes to Russian-speaking people and with Russian language, there are no specific features except one, I guess. This is called R, this sound. Yeah, because like English speakers, they never pronounce this R. It doesn't exist in Russian or in English pronunciation. They never say strong like this R sound. In our language, it's R, very hard. Robot, работа, which work. For example, work, it's работа in Russian, work. So it's very strong. R. But in English, it's almost never pronounced like so strongly R sound. That's the one thing. And
So then, but I mean, what does that mean for a Russian speaker? Actually, I think I know the sound that you're talking about because I've worked with Russian candidates before, and when they're describing themselves, I think you would use that sound to even say the word Russia, wouldn't you?
Yeah. Russia, yeah, it's very strong.
Yeah, so it's like that's right away. It's like they're in part 1 of their speaking examination, and then they.
It's very clear that they come from Russian-speaking society. It's very strong. I come from Russia, Voronezh. Exactly. And when it comes to Kazakh speaking people, well, Ryan, it's very interesting about our people. I mean, Kazakh people. Very interesting fact that our people are able to speak any language without accent, or almost no accent. It's very funny to think about our culture.
And is that because you guys are? Well, is that because of the trilingual upbringing?
No, of course not. It's because trilingual is like a new political stuff, but It comes, I guess, from very long time ago. I actually can't explain this. I just know when we speak any language, whether it be Chinese, English, Arabic, Japanese, whatever, we speak it almost without an accent. That's our kind of advantage, or distinguishing characteristic, I would say, about our culture. Even like if you talk to more Kazakh candidates, you may feel like their English level is pretty good, and the accent isn't so like noticeable.
No, that is true. I can say that. Yeah, that's something I have noted. It's also interesting because I find the Kazakh candidates that I've spoken to through Skype, they're like you. They often do a lot of their preparation alone, which means I don't know why that is exactly, to be honest. But there's something I guess about, like you're saying, about the history, about the way that people approach language learning, where they're able to kind of internalize the language a bit deeper and produce it, without a noticeable accent.
Yeah, that's very amazing about our culture. Even being myself a Kazakh, I can't explain this. And when it comes to you saying like we prepare by ourselves, I can explain. Maybe one reason is that internet has become very, very widespread not so long ago, maybe like 5-7 years only. And there are this kind of websites, podcasts like you, Liz, and others, they became quite popular not so long ago in Kazakhstan as well. Not many people know about them. And these days there are a lot of people like Liz and others. And it's hard to choose which one is like suitable for you, because like they are like puzzled. They have a lot of offers, let's say 10 IELTS teachers, like including you, Liz, and others. Not making advertisements, but Liz is the most popular. And they like don't know which one to choose. Because there are a lot of stuff, and they decide, okay, I will do it by myself. Just watching YouTube videos. Most of the guys, yes, they turn to YouTube, I would say, definitely. In Russia and Kazakhstan, they just watch different videos on YouTube. Maybe it's not the best strategy, but it helps. Even from the stories of my friends, my students, they say we watch YouTube all the time, get some things. I mean, one teacher, for example, let's say, I wouldn't make advertisement, let's say John. He makes good videos about speaking, for example. Watch about speaking, only John. Then turn about writing, it's like Juliet, for example. She writes excellent about writing. And I haven't found one teacher who is good at all types of exam, to be honest. For example, I was checking, like trying to find some experts to myself to develop professionally like a teacher. I haven't found any teacher who is good at all 4 sections, if you trust me. I mean, some teachers are good at writing. I always listen to them. Others are very good at reading and writing. Like, if you agree with me or not, but what do you think about this?
No, I do. Well, I think that, I think you were saying at the beginning of the interview that different teachers are going to teach in ways that may resonate with different candidates, or resonate with candidates differently. So certain candidates might appreciate one style of teaching, or and they might actually also appreciate a certain accent. For example, so we were talking about Liz, so she's got kind of the classic British English, and maybe that's helpful to certain people that are, they grew up studying that kind of English. So this is just an extension of what they learned in their earlier days. I think also, certain strategies are going to work with different kinds of candidates. I mean, you and I both had experience with the way in which Chinese people like to study, which I think is a bit different. It's actually quite different than pretty much anywhere else in the world. The Far East kind of does its own thing when it comes to preparing for these types of exams. So yeah, I think you're right that
Good points.
Sometimes it can be helpful to have a pool of teachers that you tap into to build your skills.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, try different teachers, try different websites. Then, for example, you stick to Liz when it comes to writing. It's very good. When it comes to some like speaking things, go to another teacher. So if you go back to reading part, for example, a lot of people like on YouTube, they make kind of advertisement stuff like read the first sentence and the last sentence of the paragraph and you will understand. Guys, it's not serious.
I know, yeah. Well, where they're trying to sell these study strategies that are actually not going to be very helpful to the candidates.
Of course, they don't work. They don't work. Read the first sentence and last sentence, and you will be able to answer questions like matching headings. You will never be able to do this, actually.
Yeah, absolutely.
It doesn't work.
Yeah, I remember actually in China too, because you walk into a bookstore in China, in Shanghai, and you'll see 20 different series just dedicated to the IELTS. And then some of the study strategies that you see, they teach exactly that. Like they teach these. I think it's just when you tell students it's that easy, then they're like, "Oh, this is exciting. This is make it easier. Let me buy this book series." But I mean, you're not really. At the end of the day, it's a language proficiency examination. It's designed to test how strong you are in a language, not whether you can game the system or not. So I think, yeah, you're right. It's the candidates are unfortunately getting sent down these rabbit holes that don't really get them anywhere.
Yeah, they have to be smart, guys. Just don't trust this first sentence and last sentence. If it were like that easy, the IELTS wouldn't exist, or otherwise everyone would get 9, and that's it.
Yeah.
It doesn't work that way. It's not that easy.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Okay, Sultan, maybe I'll just move us towards a conclusion then.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Okay, so we've talked about we've talked about your experience with the examination and with your new project now that you're working on with regards to teaching IELTS specific skills to other candidates online.
Mainly Russian speaking.
Yep, to the Russian speaking community. So I think that this interview has been really exciting. I think that candidates are going to walk away with a number of actionable strategies that they can use.
Yeah.
And sorry, go ahead.
I hope so. Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
I'm sorry, I thought you said and also. Yeah, I am sure they will. And actually, the one thing I like about your tips is that they're all web-based. So anybody listening to this from any corner of the planet can get access to exactly what you're talking about, and they can start to experience some growth in their language today. So, Sultan, I'd like to thank you very much for coming on the show and sharing these very valuable tips with everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan, for inviting me and having this nice conversation. It's very nice, as we talked before. And for all the candidates who are preparing for the IELTS exam, I wish you good luck, guys, and believe in yourself. IELTS is not that difficult as you think. Just get the right preparation, and that's it, guys. Good luck.
Great. So if you want to check out Sultan's work, go to YouTube, search Sultan, and his last name is spelled Rakhinzhanoe, and you can find his helpful materials there. So once again, thank you, Sultan, and good luck with your IELTS-based projects.
All right. Thank you, Ryan. Goodbye.